Hello, everyone. Good to see all your faces, all your names. Welcome to Legislating Homelessness with Jesse Rabinowitz. I'm Jenny Chamberlain. For those of you who don't know me, I work for Beaverton City Library. This event is part of the library's community-wide reading program, One Book, One Beaverton, which this year is in celebration of the book Rough Sleepers by Tracy Kidder. Please be aware that tonight's event is being recorded. If you have questions for Jesse, please submit them in the chat as they occur to you. He will answer as many as time allows. Our presenter tonight, Jesse Rabinowitz, is the Campaign and Communications Director at the National Homelessness Law Center. He led the communications and power building work on the historic Johnson versus Grants Pass Supreme Court case. He also leads the Housing Not Handcuffs campaign, which brings together local, state, and federal partners to fight against laws that make it a crime to live outside and push for housing and other proven solutions to homelessness. His work is frequently featured in various media outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and USA Today. Jesse received his master's in social work at Howard University and currently lives in Washington, D.C. with his family. We appreciate him being here, even though there's a 3-hour time difference. So thank you for that, Jesse. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jesse.
Hey y'all, it's really good to be with you. It is a bit late my time, so I'm a bit sleepy, but we're gonna power through. Um, I am gonna just walk through some slides, which I hope set the stage for our conversation, and then really wanna, have a conversation. And before I do that, I just want to thank y'all for being here and like caring about your neighbors who live outside and learning more about this. And I think if more people were taking time out of their busy days to learn about homelessness and learn about solutions to homelessness, we'd be in a much different place. Um, I will also just thank the library and all the amazing library workers. My spouse is a librarian, and I normally don't say no to speaking requests at 9 o'clock on nights, but I can't say no to librarians. So just thank you for all the work that you do. And I used to do homeless outreach and spend a lot of time at the libraries and know how many people, at least in DC, rely on the library for a place to be. And I'm just continually grateful for that work. And before I dive into the slide deck, I want to just note that we at the Law Center are really feeling the increased urgency and the outrage about the ICE killings that have been happening across the country and the continued crackdowns on folks who have chosen to make their lives in our country. And we also know that the same fight against deportation is the same fight against laws that make it a crime to be homeless. And as we'll talk about, these are deeply wedded issues, and it's actually the same people fueling all of these crackdowns across the country. I'll dive into the slide deck, but again, like please feel free to drop questions in the chat. I'll try to answer them as I'm able, and then I'll walk through this pretty quickly, so we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A towards the end. I like to start out with just a few facts. More people are sleeping outside than they ever have since we've been keeping count. There are about 700,000 people on a given night who experience homelessness in America, and that is because the rent is too high and wages are too low. We know right now that over that about 50% of people pay more in rent each month than they can afford. And we see pretty consistently that about 60% of households struggle to make ends meet. There's data that shows that 1 in 4 people worry about imminently becoming homeless, and that 1 in 5 households is spending 100% of their income on rent. This is not sustainable. This is indicative of a housing system that just isn't working. And when you have a housing system that isn't working, people have no choice but to sleep outside. And we know that for every $100 increase in rent, homelessness goes up by 9%. So think about over the past 5 or 10 years, how many times your rent or your mortgage or your property taxes have gone up by $100. that is why more and more people are sleeping outside, because the housing system is not working for the people who are making little or no income in this country. And we also know that homelessness is caused by systemic racism. Where I'm at in DC, 90% of people, 9 out of 10 people experiencing homelessness are Black. The population in DC on average is about 45% Black. So this is not an accident. This is actually the result of purposeful policies that have funneled Black people, brown people, indigenous people into homelessness at vastly disproportionate rates. And despite what folks might want you to believe, the solution to homelessness has and always will be housing with supports. Um, I saw that myself as a caseworker working with folks with severe and persistent mental illness who, when they got the housing and support they need with no strings attached, thrived and were able to reconnect with their family, access medical care, find jobs, and really thrive in communities that and that we know that housing works, housing with support works. Um, I'm going to focus largely on the increase in laws that make it a crime to be homeless, because that's what my work focuses on. And just to ground us a little bit, laws that make it a crime to be homeless, poor, sick, Black, disabled, brown, immigrant are not new to this country. They're as old as this country. At the same time, we see that there is an increase in laws that make it a crime to be homeless, and particularly that focus is coming from the Trump administration. So while these things are not new, there's a clear escalation that we are in the middle of. And I'm going to try to help connect some of these dots between Palantir, the Cicero Institute, Grants Pass, Trump, what's going on in DC, and what's happening in Utah. And this is just kind of how my mind works, and this is kind of what's going to guide our conversation this evening. I'm curious, and I can't see everyone's faces, but I generally ask who has heard of the Cicero Institute. And I'm curious, it's hard to see with sharing my slide, but can anyone give a thumbs up if they've heard of the Cicero Institute? And maybe Jeannie can let me know if there are any thumbs up. Okay, that is not unusual. This is one. Okay, I'll take it. The Cicero Institute is a billionaire-backed far right-wing think tank with close ties to the Trump administration that was founded by a man named Joe Lonsdale. Joe Lonsdale was a co-founder of a tech firm called Palantir. Most people have heard of Palantir because they create and sell facial recognition technology and other surveillance technology to militaries and governments across the world. Uh, and during the first Trump administration, Palantir technology was used to track and then help the federal government detain and then deport migrants. So when we say that the immigration system and the homelessness system are being controlled by the same people, that same person's name is Joe Lonsdale, and we see his fingerprints over all of this. They have been passing with some success, moderate success, I'd say, laws that make it a crime to be homeless in states across the country using a cookie cutter approach. Um, and while each bill is different, they kind of have they have similar themes. They make it a crime to sleep outside with things punishable, like with jail time up to a year or $5,000 in fines. They defund the housing and support that we know works, and redirects that funding towards things like forced treatment, detention camps, and forced hospitalization. They degrade human rights, they degrade people's legal rights and make it easier to force people into treatment and force psychiatric treatment, and they increase the policing of homelessness. I like to shout out Kentucky as the winner of the worst Cicero law. Um, they not only have these cookie cutter elements, they added a new provision that said if there's a homeless person on your private property, you can invoke a stand your ground defense and use force, including deadly force, to remove them. They have legislated making it okay to kill a homeless person if they're on your property. Um, and unfortunately, they've had some success. This map is outdated. We're working on getting an updated one, but many of these states in red specifically have Cicero laws on the books. It started in Texas, it spread to, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, as I mentioned, Tennessee, and we have seen this proliferation of laws that make it a crime to be homeless. Um, so much so that states are introducing them right and left. This legislative session that started the first week in January, we've already seen 3 states introduce Cicero laws, and they're introducing them because the Cicero Institute is paying out-of-state lobbyists to come in and lobby elected officials. Um, and trying to sell them this poison pill that says if you throw folks in jail for being homeless, you won't have homelessness anymore. When in reality, they're just shifting homelessness from public view to behind bars, which is not a solution. And none of these things in the Cicero Institute's bill or any of these policies do anything to address the underlying cause of homelessness, which is the fact that rent is too expensive. We do have some good news. Last year, there were 54 bills introduced in state houses across the country that tried to make it a crime to be homeless. And advocates in those states defeated 80% of those laws. So we see that in state after state, we are going up against literal billionaires and we're beating them back 4 out of 5 times, which shows to me that we have a lot of power. In the last year, following the Grants Pass decision, which I'm sure y'all know more about than most people in the country, when the Supreme Court made it illegal or made it legal to arrest, ticket, or fine people for sleeping outside, over a dozen states introduced legislation that we worked on called the Gloria Johnson Act that actually restored the protections that the Supreme Court gutted. So we are seeing a fierce resistance to this push to make it a crime to be homeless. And we know that we're going to need even more of a push as those forces that want to make it a crime to be homeless and poor continue to gather strength in this country. But we can see from here how the Cicero Institute has really shaped and impacted state homelessness policy. I mentioned Grants Pass, and I'll say it again. So about 19 months ago, the Supreme Court decided that cities and states, based on the town of Grants Pass, that can arrest or ticket or otherwise criminalize people when they're sleeping outside. This really includes someone who is using a rolled up jacket as their pillow. That is considered camping. That's if you're using a piece of cardboard to stay warm, that is considered camping. And I really like to name Grants Pass because they went to the Supreme Court and said, our hands are tied. If you let us arrest homeless people, we'll solve homelessness in Grants Pass. Go to Grants Pass now. They have not solved homelessness, and things have actually deteriorated more. People are still being ticketed, people are being fined, people are being arrested, and there's still no housing. So their hands are now untied. They can do these things that they said they needed to be able to do, and they haven't solved homelessness because their intention was never to solve homelessness. And if you listen to some town hall transcripts from the town of Grants Pass, their elected officials made it very clear that they wanted to make homelessness in Grants Pass so uncomfortable that people would move out. The problem is, in Grants Pass and in cities across the country, people experience homelessness in the cities and towns where they are from, where they have connections. That's where they want to be. And saying we're going to force you out because you can't pay rent here anymore is not an actual policy solution. So I mentioned the Cicero Institute, right? The Cicero Institute filed a brief with the Supreme Court in favor of the town of Grants Pass that said, we think that Grants Pass should be able to arrest homeless people. And the Supreme Court listened to them. And it's been 19 months since the Supreme Court ruling. Since that time, over 300 bills have passed in cities across the country that make it a crime to be homeless. Many of these bills have things like $1,000 in fines or 6 months in jail. It goes without saying that if someone had $1,000, they would not be sleeping outside anymore. And throwing someone in jail for 6 months does nothing to help them find a job. It makes it harder for them to find a job. It makes it harder for them to find housing, and it makes it harder for them to get their feet back on the ground. This is a map that our friends at the ACLU put together. It just shows the density. The darker the blue, the more anti-homeless laws they have in cities in that state. Um, so we've talked about state law, now we've talked about city law, and I want to bring us to the federal government. So Joe Lonsdale, again, the Palantir billionaire who founded the Cicero Institute, is now shaping White House policy around homelessness. But we know that his values are aligned with those of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has talked very openly about a desire to round homeless people up and force them into government-run detention camps. His HUD secretary was asked about this plan. He did not deny it. Um, and now they are in power and are using their power to create government-run detention camps, or try to create government-run detention camps. In the spring, the Trump administration issued an executive order which cracked down on homelessness. That's what they said, crack down on homelessness. It actually just cemented their plan to move us backwards into a time where people were forced into institutions if they were poor. People were required to jump through all sorts of hoops to get housing. And I like to remind folks that, like, we have tried that. That is not a new approach. That's actually a very old approach. And it didn't work, which is why we stopped doing it. But like many things right now, it does feel like we are moving backwards. And if you look at the side by side between the executive orders and Trump's HUD budgets and some of these Cicero laws, it is not a coincidence that they are the same. And what we really see happening right now is the stage being set to round homeless people up and force them into government-run detention camps. We get asked a lot, what is a detention camp? One example is what happened in New Orleans during the Super Bowl. The state of Louisiana spent about $17.5 million to force 100 homeless people away from the city center into a warehouse where there was limited plumbing, there wasn't really heat, there was no sidewalks, so they wouldn't be in public view. For the cost of that, they could have solved homelessness for 80% of the homeless folks in New Orleans for a year. But instead, they forced them into this warehouse. When the Super Bowl was over, they forced them back out. Nobody got housed. And they wasted $17.5 million, which could have been used to fund housing that people need. We had a call earlier tonight to really bring light to what's happening in Utah. Utah is talking very seriously about creating a massive government-run homeless detention camp. There's talks about having 1,300 beds, including about 800 beds for forced treatment. There's also talk that there will be a forced labor component. People are going to be held against their will. Utah, should be noted, already has one of Cicero's anti-homeless cookie cutter bills on the books, which is how they're able to then say, if you're sleeping outside, you can either go to jail or we can take you to a detention camp. And the same lobbyists that are pushing for these anti-homeless bills are actively working in Utah. And one of Cicero's head lobbyists has actually moved to Utah to push for this bill. There are many scary pieces about this. One is that Utah's indicated that they plan to request federal funding to build this detention camp. And the Trump administration has indicated that they think that is a good idea. I really don't think we should have to be saying this out loud, but putting people into camps is not good. But this is where we are. So if you sign up to our email list, which I'll show at the end, you'll get some more information about the campaign we're running to stop any federal funds from funding homeless detention camps. And I think it's really important to notice that we didn't start with policy. We started with dehumanization. The dehumanization of homeless folks has been going on for a very, very long time, and it's just gotten worse, right? We saw a Fox News host openly call for homeless people to be killed. And when that becomes normalized, we see that shape policy. The man who killed Jordan Neely, who was a mentally ill homeless New Yorker, was not only acquitted. After his acquittal, he was invited to sit. He was venerated as a hero and he was invited to join the Trump administration in their box at a football game. We have seen a woman experiencing homelessness being given a ticket for sleeping outside while she was in active labor. The police officer didn't believe that she was in labor. She gave birth to a healthy boy later that day. That can only happen if people are dehumanized, right? You can only see someone in labor when they need help and give them a ticket if you believe that person is not as human as you are. And we saw this in Atlanta on MLK Day weekend, when a man named Cornelius Taylor was sleeping outside a block away from Ebenezer Baptist Church when the city went to clear his encampment, and in doing so, killed him with a bulldozer. That only happens when you think people are less than human. But now what we are seeing is this this dehumanization of homeless folks really shape policy. And we're seeing that where I live in DC. These are pictures that I took when the Trump administration sent armed police to take over our city. We saw dozens of police officers, FBI, Secret Service, Homeland Security, Border Patrol, harassing people experiencing homelessness. They did not come with offers of help or housing. They came with guns and sirens. And then the following day, we saw them destroy people's tents and force people further into the shadows. And we also continue to see the National Guard deployment in DC. I like to remind folks that the National Guard deployment in DC costs us, DC residents, about $1 million a day in taxes. For the cost of the Guard deployment here, we could have solved homelessness. So when we hear politicians say there's not enough resources, well, they found $17.5 million for a homeless camp in New Orleans. They have found hundreds of millions of dollars for the National Guard to stand on DC streets and do nothing. We have the money in this country, right? It does not have to be like this. But we have to build the political will and build the political understanding that homelessness is not an individual problem. It's indicative of society that has its priorities backwards. And together, I know we can push for real change. We think it's really important to note that the way that Trump is attacking homeless people is out of an authoritarian playbook, and it's not going to stop in DC, it's not going to stop in Utah, and it's not going to stop with homeless folks. I'm going to skip a bunch of this so we can get into Q&A, but here's our website. Here's how you can get in touch with me. Check out housingwithouthandcuffs.org. We're going to be sending out some emails very soon about some exciting updates about this campaign that we just launched. And I am going to stop screen sharing so we can hear questions and keep talking about this.
So
I
feel free
saw one hand already, but I lost who it belonged to.
Yeah, you can either raise your hand or put your question in the chat.
The chat is disabled.
Oh, are you not? Okay, let me take a look.
I just had a question of clarification about what the Supreme Court said regarding grants passed, and then what grants passed were trying to do, because it sounded like you said Supreme Court said something or reversed something, and then grants passed didn't do something. So yeah, I wanted you to clarify that. I got lost right there. Thanks.
Sure, yeah, the Supreme Court ruled there was some pretty long-standing law that you could not arrest someone for sleeping outside when there was nowhere else for them to go. And the Supreme Court in the grants pass, I'm sorry, there was existing law that said you could not ticket someone for sleeping outside when there was nowhere else to go. The Supreme Court reversed that and said that you can fine, ticket, arrest, or otherwise criminalize people, even if there is no shelter, even if there is nowhere else to go. And the point I was trying to make is that grants pass, their argument was our hands are tied by this existing law that says we can't make it a crime to be homeless. And that's why there's homelessness in grants pass. And if you untie our hands, we'll solve homelessness. But they haven't. The situation has only deteriorated. And we knew that was going to happen because, again, arresting homeless people, ticketing homeless people, fining homeless people doesn't make the rent cheaper. doesn't help people find jobs. All it does is push people further into homelessness and poverty.
Yeah, that's the part I didn't understand, because if Supreme Court reversed something, then grants passed should be able to do something, or what was it before? Yeah, because it sounds like two things, the same thing is going on. So I don't know. Does other people get it? Maybe I'm just like hearing.
Is your question like was the grants pass decision a reversal of a previous
Yeah,
decision?
yeah. And then what were they supposed to do if it, yeah. I don't know what, if it was illegal before and it's illegal after, there's no change.
No, it was illegal before. It is not illegal now. So they can fine and ticket and arrest homeless folks, and they are doing that.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, thanks, Jesse.
Are those tickets considered misdemeanors or felonies?
They're often considered misdemeanors to begin with, but if you have a misdemeanor that you can't pay, or if you can't pay your misdemeanor fine, then that rolls into a felony.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. And now, so they've gotten a record that they
That's
can't.
right.
Thank you.
And if I'm remembering correctly, again, it's 9:30 my time, the Tennessee Cicero law does have a felony clause. I don't know that anyone has been charged, or sorry, I don't know that anyone's been convicted of a felony yet. But that seems to be a place where this might go.
Jesse, can you see the
There are several
two
comments in
questions
the chat.
Yeah. Can you see those?
Yeah, what is being done to reduce and/or control rents? It's city by city. Right now, the federal government is not doing anything to control rents. And I've heard the foreign capital that is being used to buy up apartment buildings. I think more so than foreign capital, what we're seeing is venture capitalist firms buy up housing, both, apartment buildings and single family homes, and then using that to to turn a profit. I also can share the concerns about the Super Bowl and the FIFA World Cup. It's gonna I think it's going to be bad. I think it's going to be really bad. I think there's also going to be an increased ICE deployment in those places. I think it's going to be all sorts of bad.
Jesse, in the interim, can you talk a little bit more about the work that your organization does and who your clients are, or the advocacy that you guys do?
Sure. So we're a small shop. There's about 15 people on staff. But we do impact litigation. And really supporting local and state-based organizations to lend some of our expertise specifically around legality around homelessness. We do youth-specific policy advocacy. We do general advocacy around the criminalization of homelessness. My team does a lot of communications and organizing work across the country. But it's really I would say the bulk of our work is supporting state and local advocates across the country to be a resource for them and to help draw some connections between the people who are fighting this fight in California with the people who are fighting this fight in West Virginia, so we can really build a large coalition, so we can build the public will needed to actually solve homelessness. This question is ICE empowered to confront unhoused citizens? Absolutely. We saw this in Minneapolis last week. ICE detained and has currently disappeared 3 men from a homeless encampment. It's important to note that they were also members of the Oglala Sioux tribe. They're indigenous to this country, so I'm not sure where ICE wants them to go back to because they are from here. But yes. And we've seen that in DC too, right? Like ICE has detained and deported many clients.
Feel free to just unmute yourself and ask your question too if you want.
I love this question of how we can help. I mean, what I tell folks is to make noise, to get involved. I've spent most of my career doing local advocacy, and it's really amazing how emails from a few concerned citizens can totally change the conversation. I'll never forget there was a we were trying to win a vote, and I was talking to the chief of staff of one of the elected officials, and I said, you know, how is your boss going to vote on this? And she pulled up the neighborhood Facebook group and was counting. Well, this many people said good things about this bill. This many people said bad things about this bill. And that's how they were making a decision. That wasn't the only factor in their decision-making process, but they were paying attention to it. So I think we got to be loud, right? I think we have to be in those annoying Facebook groups. I think next door, right? Like our people are paying attention. Our opposition or the people who would rather arrest homeless people are very, very loud. And we have to be louder. And I actually think that we are at this time where we can be louder. And our polling shows that for the first time, more people understand that homelessness is caused by a broken housing system than by people who have made personal choices. And when we ask, you know, what's changed your mind, 2/3 of respondents said because they changed their mind because either they or a loved one had experienced homelessness. So as the housing crisis continues to get worse, more people are starting to realize that like this isn't working. And I like to remind people that the largest growing group of homeless people in this country are senior citizens. Senior homelessness is expected to increase by 300% in the next 4 years. So this is like, I'm thinking about my parents, right? Like they should not have to live outside because their retirement savings can no longer cover their rent. And I think when we talk about it in those terms, people really get what's going on. I see this question in the chat about giving concerns about money. I get that is like the two questions I get asked the most are like, should we say the homeless or unhoused or people experiencing homelessness in some nomenclature? And what should we give? What should we do when someone asks for money? And my answer is and always will be, give them money. People deserve the dignity and the ability to make that choice. My boss, when she signs my paycheck, doesn't say, here's your paycheck. Are you going to spend, what are you going to spend it on? Are you going to spend it on alcohol? Maybe. But it's my money, right? So people are the best decision makers in their life. In most of my experience, people buy food. People will maybe try to save enough money to get into a motel when it's really, really cold. Sometimes people buy drugs or alcohol. Sometimes, like most people, sometimes buy drugs or alcohol. And I really think that like when the money leaves your hand, the judgment has to stop there. But I say give money. If you really, really, really are just like cannot give yourself to give money, give a gift card to like CVS or something where people can again have that autonomy to choose the things that they want to buy. Lots of questions. What housing and rent control? Sorry, yeah.
I just wanted to comment on the feedback that you just gave. In the past, I have given like Nutri-Grain bars. I've asked folks who are standing on the street corners, are you hungry? Would you like to eat this? And they often will agree. Do you think that that is discouraging or like it's something that I can afford more than giving out cash?
Yeah, I mean, I think do what you can do. I think it's Nutri-Grain bars are like particularly good because they're soft and oftentimes people experiencing homelessness have like not great dental health. But I also am concerned about like we know that the rates of diabetes among folks experiencing homelessness are really high. So yeah, I mean it's better to do something than do nothing. And sometimes when I don't have cash, I'll also give out Nutrigrain bars. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think like if you're thinking about what am I going to do and you have the means to, like, I think giving $1 here or there goes a long way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, just trying to keep up with these great questions in the chat. Housing and rent control, what are you advocating for? I mean, big picture, we're advocating for a world where housing is treated as a basic need and not as a commodity. Short-term picture right now, we're advocating for like, don't arrest people for sleeping outside and use some of our country's vast resources to build housing that we know works and to really stay focused on what we know works. And that is and continues to be providing folks with housing first and then providing them with the wraparound services they need to get and stay stable. I had a friend who has since passed away, but he was homeless for a long time, and he was around during this what I call era of housing last, when we made people jump through all these hoops, and it just didn't work for him. It wasn't because he wanted to be homeless, but like he wasn't able to take his medication daily because it kept getting thrown away because the government kept throwing his stuff away. He couldn't find a job because he was spending his time worrying about where he was going to sleep at night. When he got, so he kept cycling through these programs that just like didn't work. When he got housed in 3 days and he stayed housed for the rest of his life. From his housing, he was able to, he had really, really bad asthma when he was living outside. He got healthy enough that he actually ran 20 marathons, and he became a homeless street outreach worker because he was still annoyed and angry that people were still living outside. Like he devoted his life to that. And it just shows, like, I see his face, right? It worked. It worked for him and it works for people across the country. And nationally, about 85 to 95% of people stay housed after their first year if they're given the services and support they need. But right now, we're seeing the federal government and state governments backtrack. And what we're really fighting for is not a specific program, but a philosophy of getting folks the housing and support that they need first, and then making sure that they have the support they need to stay housed. What is the best way to encourage people to care about homeless folks? What works? I think, I mean, I do a lot of trainings on like how to get people to care about stuff. And the question I always ask the room is, think about a time when you've changed your mind. Not about not the thing that you changed your mind on, but like just like think about a time when you changed your mind. And then I ask like, what was it that made you change your mind? And it's very infrequently data. It's very infrequently yelling at someone on social media. It's very infrequently like a 20-page report. It's talking to people and having conversations. So I think the best thing that we can do is talk to more people and help educate people about this. Like give people rough sleepers, let people know, like help people understand the truth about what's going on. And there's a lot of Oregon specific questions, which like I'm probably not the best person to answer. I will say the only time I've been to Oregon was when was out there about no, my kid, I don't know. About early into the Trump administration, about 200 people were evicted from the Deschutes National Forest in Bend, Oregon, and I was out there to support them. So that was my first and only experience in being in Oregon. So I would direct the Oregon specific questions to Oregonians.
Well, I'm an Oregonian, but I just have some comments. I am somebody who has experienced homelessness back when I was in my 20s. And what helped me turn the corner was an older lady took me in. So, I mean, I don't like the part about, pointing to government and say, you should do something. I think it's going to have to be the people who have a heart for us. And I, in turn, as I have matured and learned how to get a job and look for a job, have taken in people who didn't have a job or a house. And so one person stayed a year, one person stayed a few months. I think there's a total of 3 people over my life with my husband. And I read the book by Sisters of the Road, where they went in Oregon and actually interviewed homeless people. And it seemed like 25% of them, they interviewed them and paid them for their time.
Yeah.
I think 25% of them were drug addicted, 25% were alcohol addicted, 25% were crazy, and 25% of them were down on the luck. So that still means 75% of them needed help. So I'm not opposed to getting people help. And also, I think, you said your parents might be in a situation. Are you somebody willing to house your parents?
Yes, if need be. But my
Kristen,
parents
if you
don't.
recommend that book, what's its title?
I gave away my copy to the local Family Promise of Beaverton. Sisters of the Road did it. I'm sorry, it was a good book because it was hearing from people. They're
Okay.
in Portland. Maybe I can look for it while the rest of you guys have questions.
I'm trying to look for it too. Yeah, no, I agree. Like people need a lot of help. Everyone needs a lot of help, regardless of where they live, right? Like I know that, like I think about for me as like a licensed social worker, it's still really hard to get good mental health care that I can afford here. So that I'm not debating that people need help. People absolutely need all sorts of help. We should make the help work. And what we know works is voluntary services that actually meet people's needs, not, forcing people into a detention camp. I'm trying to find this book.
Do we have 17 minutes left?
Yeah, we have about 15 minutes left. Yeah.
I think the book is Voices from the Street, Truths About Homelessness.
That sounds right.
Thank you.
Pretty
I
sure
still
you
haven't
can
found it.
borrow it. I think you can borrow it from the library.
Okay, thanks. I'm on Amazon. I didn't find it. Can you put
Jesse,
that
you
in the,
want to talk? Oh,
can
sorry.
you,
Go ahead.
can you put that in the chat for the rest of you want to know? Thank you.
Yeah. Jesse, can you talk a little bit about what you saw in the Deschutes National Forest?
Sure. I mean, I met the most amazing folks who were living in the forest. The New York Times did a really good, they had some really good photos. I'll try to find that. I mean, there were people, primarily senior citizens, who were living in RVs that no longer worked because they had gotten, they were lifelong Bend residents, been there for generations, really people whose families literally built the town of Bend. And it's like as tourism came, and especially as COVID came and kind of ruined the economy, people just couldn't afford rent anymore. At the same time, primarily tech folks from California were moving to Bend because they wanted more space and they wanted to be outdoors, which exacerbated the housing crisis. And these folks were living in the forest. Most of them worked, but they couldn't afford rent. And the Trump administration basically said, get out or we're going to put you in jail for 5 years. And they said, we're closing down the forest to do forest preservation. But they also at the same time opened up the forest to logging companies. So at about 3 a.m, they officially closed the gates and said, anyone else who's in here, everyone is subject to arrest and has to leave. And then throughout the night, they just kept opening the gate and opening the gate to let logging trucks go in. So it was really clear that you could be in the forest if you were there to make money for logging industry, but you couldn't be in the forest if you had no choice but to live there. So folks got displaced. A lot of folks had their RVs and their fifth wheels and their belongings destroyed. They didn't get any housing. They moved to another forest and they're still there. I love this question. Why do some leaders think that jailing, finding, and detaining works? I think it's deeper than that, and I think about this question all of the time, Julia. I think it's rooted in an idea, and sorry, I'm just going to plug my computer in, that homelessness is a choice, and that if we made homelessness worse or made homelessness hard, if it wasn't hard enough, then people would make a different choice. And it's just not true, right? I've been doing this work for a long time, and I've never met anyone in my life, in my career, who said, when I was a little kid, what I dreamed about being when I grew up was homeless. It's not something anyone chooses for themselves. So this idea that we can force people to make a different choice just isn't true. There are no other choices. If you're sleeping outside, you have no other choices. So we have to help people understand that this is not an individual issue. This is an issue of a country that has 50% of people struggling to pay rent each month. I certainly think some politicians know it doesn't work and just don't care, just don't want to see it anymore. And I think that's why it really is a national and statewide issue, because like your town might pass this ordinance, but it's just going to push it to the next town. And that town's going to push it to the next state. And it's just like we're playing human whack-a-mole across city and state borders, and we're not actually resolving the thing. And in the meantime, we're actually wasting a ton of resources making it a crime to be homeless. And we're making people sick and we're killing them. And it doesn't work, and it's not going to work because we're never going to arrest our way out of homelessness. It's just not going to work.
Jesse, hi. You made a point earlier about get loud, asking us to get loud. And so I think that if we can make a kind of a blanket statement that elected officials would say, like, if I cannot see them, then they don't exist. That's partially because the community at large is saying that as well.
Totally.
Okay. And then go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I am going to at least share a story. So I have 62 staff, and about 82% of my staff have lived experience with mental health, addiction, homelessness, or all three combined, which is usually the case. And I do have some staff members where jail was their saving grace. It was probably not the first time in jail. It was the fourth or fifth time. But jail was where they finally made a change. But to Jesse's point, that was self-driven. That wasn't somebody else telling them to do it. They were ready to make that change at that point. And they happened to be in jail, clean, getting sleep, being fed, and then they changed the trajectory of their life. So the question for me was kind of two parts. I do think that many people, elected or not, do believe that if we can't see them, they just don't exist, which to Jesse's point about giving out money or items to people that we see on the side of the road, there's just such a dignity level to that we have to consider, that people feel invisible because we make them feel invisible. So if we can take those extra steps to do that piece of kindness, it's really important.
Oh,
Can
I ask her a question? That question about what the Portland is doing when the people they like knock on the doors of a homeless person. I mean, homeless with a door, but asking, hello, why did they? In the newspaper, I was reading that they didn't answer. They didn't answer the door. So what about? Can you speak to that?
I didn't fully get your question. Just repeat it for me one time.
What's going on with the story about the people that are in homeless assisted living, and now they're wanting to make them do the next step, like clear out, either move on or move up, clear out for the next person who's homeless, but they're not answering the door. Does that make sense? What I mean?
It does. I'm going to do what I normally do in situations. So hi, you guys. My name is Kim Marshall, and I run an agency called Project Homeless Connect here in Washington County. So that's going to be step one, is I'm going to bring it back to Washington County, because Beaverton, our amazing library in Beaverton, is where we are tonight, engaging in this conversation around One Book, One Beaverton. And so I can't speak to Portland for a multitude of reasons, partially because the tapestry is completely different here in Washington County, and specifically Beaverton. And so I don't know that. I do know that some of the folks that we have housed aren't opening their door because of fear. and we can, get into that. But
But are
so-
they locals, or would they be afraid of ICE, or I don't know if
they would
that-
be afraid of ICE.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, and I want to go to this back to this point where, like, yeah, some people certainly jail has kind of not a protective, but like jail helps them get back on track. And it just makes me really sad that for a lot of people, that's the only place they can go and get sleep, right? Like, what would it mean if you didn't have to be locked up to get the support you need, right? The prison system is the largest mental health care provider in the country, but it doesn't need to be. If we had strong resource communities, we could prevent people from having to go to jail, from going to jail in the first place. And I see this question about what about offering money to someone who appears homeless. I don't know. Personally, I don't particularly care. Like, if someone's begging, if someone's panhandling, like, they need it. It's really degrading. It's really debasing to have to ask people for money. So if someone is like down on their luck enough that like they're asking for money, like, they need it more than I do. And then there was a question.
One time I was on a bus and I offered somebody who he looked a little bit disheveled. I said, "Do you want my lunch?" And he said, "No, thanks. You need it more than me."
And like, I see that all the time, right? When I used to work at a service provision, when we would run out of meals, it was everyone else would offer the meal to the next person in line, right? Like, there's such a community and like empathy for each other that I think folks have a lot to learn from. Or like, when there was only one code, they made sure it got to the person who needed it the most. And I'll never forget that.
There was one more question. One overriding issue seems to be fear of the unpredictable behavior of people on the streets, so are shunned. How can that fear be dealt with?
Yeah, I mean, I often talk about people. I want people to help. I'm sorry. I want people to think through, are they scared, or is it fear, or are they uncomfortable? And sometimes existing in a society means you're uncomfortable, but I also think like, everyone deserves to live lives free of fear, I think. And like, that to me, like, the opposite of living in fear is like living in safety. And to really talk about what makes communities safe. And to me, that's people having a place to live, people having the food they need, people having the care they need, right? Like, again, I'm in DC. We saw the National Guard deployed here to keep us safe. That didn't make us feel safe. It made us feel really scared. So we have a really important opportunity to define what actual safety looks like. And to me, it looks like my neighbor is not scared of getting deported by ICE or detained by ICE because they have a different skin color than me. It means that everyone has a place to live regardless of what they look like. Like, that's what safety looks like. And it also means that, like, when someone is in a mental health crisis, there's someone who can respond to them. I happen to go to school and get a lot of training for that, and I've de-escalated a lot of mental health crises with a pair of socks and with a cup of coffee. When we see, and I've also seen police roll up on a mental health crisis scene, and the first thing they do is pull out a gun. That doesn't de-escalate a situation. So what people need when they're in crisis is someone who knows what they're doing, and I've never seen that be someone whose first instinct is to pull out a weapon.
Jesse, our favorite de-escalation tool is a cigarette.
Yeah, absolutely. I had people shocked that we were buying cigarettes. They work.
All right, last call for questions, or we're gonna let Jesse go to bed.
I just want to say thank you for joining us. and giving us more to think about with the combination.
Yes, thank you.
Excuse me. What the question that you just read, Jenny, about fear, I understand that entirely. And now, thanks to this talk between Jesse and Kim, a pack of cigarettes costs less than a pair of socks. And if that is a de-escalation tool, oh, Debbie's shaking her head no. If that is a de-escalation tool or something similar, that may help the person to have a conversation or start the conversation. What was the other thing you said, Jesse? You said pair of socks and something else?
Cup of coffee.
Oh, like a cup of coffee.
A cup of coffee.
I think that I'll tell the story and then I am going to go to sleep. I was talking to a bud who had lived outside for a long time, and I asked him what the hardest thing he experienced was. And I assumed it would be like sleeping outside in the cold. And he said that in DC, where he would stay, you know, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, including like senators, congresspeople, powerful people would walk past him and ignore him. And one day he had done kind of everything society tells him to do. He got a job interview, right? He was going to get a job, going to get back on his feet. He got his resume together. He borrowed some nice clothes, but he didn't know what time it was, and he didn't have a phone, and he didn't have a watch, and he wasn't sure what time he needed to leave for his interview. And he asked a woman, "Excuse me, ma'am, do you know what time it is?" And she looked at him and she said, "You're homeless. You don't need to know what time it is." That would make me crazy too. And I think that by treating people with empathy and decency like that actually goes a long way in healing some of these harms.
Everybody just wants to be seen and heard.
For sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a
I
good night,
just
y'all.
want to echo thanks for being here, and thanks for all your hard work, Jesse.
Have a good night.
Appreciate it. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night, everyone.
Night.